for joining us. So I'll read out your bio again, now that the room's filling out a bit more too. So yeah, we're really lucky to have Jonathan with us today. He's an astronomer and astrophysicist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He's a staff member at the Chandra X-ray Observatory, and also the author and editor of Jonathan's Space Report, an email distributed newsletter that you've been doing since 1989, right?
That's right.
A while. Yeah, wow. So yeah, you've been in this business for a while here. I've got about 12 or so questions that I want to ask you, and then I'd also like to invite anyone up on stage if they'd like to ask questions directly to Jonathan. But just to get the conversation started, we'll go through some of these questions, and then we'll get people up here on stage as well. So yeah, I was reading a bunch about your background here. And I guess I wanted to kick things off by discussing the cosmic microwave background. So this is something that you've studied extensively.
Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah, and so I wanted, I guess, just for the room, if you could define what is the cosmic microwave background, and why is it so fascinating as an area of research for you?
Right. It's the glow left over from the Big Bang. And so it's cosmic. That's one reason it's cool. It's microwave because when the Big Bang sort of ended its Big Bang phase, the universe became transparent, the fireball became transparent, the light from the fireball just has since then been permeating the universe, and it started off as visible light, but because of the expansion of the universe, it's been red-shifted into the radio wave bands, into the microwave. And it's a background because it's behind everything else that we're looking at. And so it's a uniform glow all over the sky that was predicted and then discovered in 1965. And by studying the little ripples in it, it's very, very smooth, but at the level of 1 part in a million, it gets brighter and fainter and brighter and fainter because of the proto-galaxies that were starting to form at the time when this magic time when the universe became transparent. And so we can learn a lot about our early universe. In fact, it's how we know, one of the main ways we know how old the universe really is, how long ago the Big Bang was, is by sort of measuring the sizes of the blobs in the background and just doing some simple surveying work to figure out how far away they are.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing, I guess, are these sort of the quantum fluctuations that then led to some of the...
Yeah, we're not seeing the quantum fluctuations themselves, but what happens is if you start off with quantum fluctuations, if you start off with, say, if you imagine a region of the universe that has 1 million atoms in it, and a region to its right that has 1,000,001 atoms. That region has just a little more gravity, and so it pulls on the one on it pulls on its neighbor harder than its neighbor pulls on it, and so it steals an extra atom, and it becomes 1,000,002. And so through this process, after a while, the whole universe curdles into lumps just from the action of gravity. And that's how the first clusters of galaxies form.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of people are familiar with this like image of the quantum of the cosmic microwave background, and you can see kind of like color fluctuations between each of them. Can you maybe explain what are we seeing?
Right. What you're seeing in these images of the microwave background that you might have seen, for example, from the European Planck satellite or from the U.S. Wilkinson WMAP satellite. You see these blobs that are basically, if you took a normal picture, in a sense, it would just be pure white. It wouldn't have any structure on it. And then if you crank up and crank up and crank up the contrast, so you can see one bit that's like 1.00001 and another bit that's 0.999999, you start to see these little blobs. They're very, very subtle. And what you're seeing is places that are slightly hotter and slightly cooler. And the reason that they're slightly hotter and slightly cooler They're all about 3 degrees above absolute zero in the present day, but they're they're like one is a millionth of a degree hotter, and so on, and that's due to the protoclusters starting to condense, and as the gas condenses under gravity, it gets denser and warmer, and we're starting to see that process. And then, when we look, there's nothing much to see after the universe becomes transparent until the lumps get so hot that they actually turn on and make stars, and that happens, some 100,000 years later. That we see the first stars and the first galaxies that the James Webb Space Telescope is starting to image for us. And so one of the fun things that we're doing is sort of trying to connect the proto-lumps that we see in the picture of the Big Bang with the actual lumps of shiny stuff of early galaxies that we see with the James Webb. And in our computers, we kind of run the universe forward, starting from our model of what the Big Bang lumps are, to predict and see, do we get what we see in the slightly later universe.
Very interesting. And how are we doing with that? As in, like, are we able to map the cosmic microwave background pretty well to what we're seeing right now when we see stars and galaxies, or are there some surprises there?
There are surprises from what I don't think they're drastic surprises. It's in the details, but of course, once you've got the theory, then every little discrepancy, right, becomes a big deal for some group of people investigating, and you have to explain these things ultimately. So what we see that the galaxies form faster than we had expected. We see that the stars switch on earlier than we had expected, and so things are clumping, congealing more quickly. And we're seeing stars that have gone through several cycles of star birth and star death to make heavy elements already in this very early universe. And so that is, that's stretching the theories. I don't think it's breaking them. Right. It says we have to tweak some of the physics the detailed physics that we're putting in of what the compositions of these things are, and the effects. So, we're missing some effects, perhaps, like the effects of early quasars ionizing the gas and causing shock waves in the gas that might sort of make star formation faster, or something like that. And so there is, there's definitely a lot of work still to do in understanding what the before and after pictures of the universe are telling us.
Okay. Interesting. So this gets me to another question here. So you mentioned quasars, and this is something else that you've studied extensively. So could you define that for the room? So what is a quasar, and what's going on with its sort of spectral energy distribution? Maybe
right. So well, really, what was going on, right, is it turns out, so people have heard of black holes, and it turns out that there are 2 kinds of black holes. There's the sort of thing where a star blows up and leaves behind a black hole, and that black hole is maybe 5 or 10 times the mass of our sun, because it's the really massive stars that blow up like that. And those are sort of the black holes that people maybe have seen sort of most in movies and stuff like that. Those are the pathetic small black holes. And there's another kind that's called a supermassive black hole, that instead of being a few times the mass of our sun, is 1,000,000 to 1,000,000,000 or even 10 billion times the mass of our sun. So I measure the black holes I study in gigasuns, billions of solar masses. And it turns out that almost every galaxy has one of these monsters right in its center, like sort of the pip in the middle of a fruit. And the black hole, the supermassive black hole, and the galaxy evolve along with each other. As one gets bigger, the other gets bigger. There's matter falls into the center of the galaxy, feeds the black hole. Some of the matter doesn't go quite into the black hole, gets spurted back out in the form of mass and radiation that then can switch off star formation in the galaxy because of its all the energy that's put into it. And so there's this weird dance between the relatively small central light year where the black hole is and the incredibly big 20, 30,000 light year scope of the whole galaxy. So one thing that can happen is if you feed the black hole a lot, there's sort of a pileup of matter trying to fall into the black hole. And famously, right, once the matter falls into the black hole, you can't see it anymore. The black hole is black. But on the way in, before it falls into the black hole, the gravity of the black hole squeezes it and makes it really hot. I mean, really hot, millions of degrees. And so it shines like crazy in every kind of light you can imagine. And an enormous amount. And just to give you an idea of how bright these things are, and that's what a quasar is. The quasar is the light from matter being squeezed by the gravity of a black hole as it falls into the black hole in the center of a galaxy. And so, we talk in terms of, our sun, right, turns mass into energy by the one equation I think almost everyone knows, E equals mc squared. And what that equation means is you take a little bit of mass and you get a lot of energy. And mass is like frozen energy, but it's really condensed. And so over the lifetime of the sun, about 1% of the mass of the sun gets turned into energy, into sunlight. And a tiny fraction of that is intercepted by the Earth and is all the energy we ever use, right? For a quasar, it's not 1% of the mass of the sun over billions of years. It's 100% of the mass of a sun every year. And so it's an incredibly luminous source of energy. So luminous that you can very easily see them, right away across the universe, billions of light years. And they just look like stars in visible light. So if you look at 1 million stars in the sky, maybe one of them is actually a quasar. And it just looks like another star, but it's billions of times further away, billions of times more luminous. If you look in X-ray light, then the stars won't show up as much and the quasar will be just as bright, will be really bright. And so it's an easy way to find them. And so I've been using X-ray telescopes to find these quasars.
Yeah, and so I want you to explain a little bit about what's going on with ARP 220. So that's something that you've studied as well, is two merging galaxies.
Yeah, that's a fun one. ARP 220, named after the astronomer who had a catalog of weird galaxies. His name was Chip Arp. And so this was the 220th in Chip Arp's catalog of weird stuff. And it's one of the most luminous objects in the local universe. And when I say local, I mean the nearest 200 or 300 million light years. And so, you have two spiral galaxies that about 10 million years ago, as we see it, did a massive head-on collision. And the cores of the two galaxies merged, and the outer parts, the spiral arms, kept on going, and only now starting to fall back and scrunch down onto the merged galaxy. And so it's an incredibly massive cosmic train wreck that has put shockwaves through the entire merged galaxy and caused a lot of new stars to form. The gas has been condensed and is formed into new stars. There's also just hot gas all around the galaxy from that's just been heated to millions of degrees by the shock waves. And then right in the middle of the merged galaxy are two supermassive black holes, the two cores of the original galaxies that are probably orbiting each other and will probably merge in a few million years and make a huge burst of gravitational waves that the successors to LISA will find if they still exist, the gravitational wave detectors. And so what I was able to do was identify the X-rays coming from those central black holes to prove that, yeah, a certain amount of the energy that's coming out from ARP 220 is from the black hole. Because the big question of this galaxy is, how is it so luminous? Where's the energy coming from? And so what we were able to establish with the aid of our Chandra X-ray Observatory telescope was that, yes, some of the energy was coming from the black hole, one of the bigger black hole of the pair in the middle of these galaxies, but most of the energy was actually coming from the newly formed stars and the hot gas associated with those newly formed stars, what's called a starburst. And so that was a really fun project that I did with Dave Clements in England, and Susan Lamb in Illinois, to sort of untangle what was going on in this very strange object.
Yeah, I'm familiar with starburst, but usually just the candy. They're very delicious.
They are delicious. That is true.
So you help run this the Chandra X-ray Observatory. I was hoping that you could maybe go into its mission and how the capabilities differ from some of these other telescopes that people might know, like the Hubble or James Webb. So yeah, could we dive into that?
Yeah. So Chandra is an amazing machine. It was launched in 1999, so it's been in orbit for 25 years. And it is the best machine for seeing X-rays from space. And so X-rays are just a kind of light that is sort of like even more ultraviolet than ultraviolet. And it's made whenever you get really energetic processes in space. So examples of how you make X-rays in space, if you have supernova explosions, right? The shock waves heat the gas to millions of degrees and you get X-rays. If you have really strong magnetic fields, like with a pulsar, that accelerates particles to near the speed of light and they make X-rays. Or if you just have an awful lot of matter, the gravity of all that matter will squeeze the gas and make it really hot. And again, you get X-rays from things like clusters of galaxies. And so the way I like to think of it is Hubble sees like the 90% of the universe that's sort of staid and boring. And Chandra sees the 10% of the universe that's really exotic, where bad things are happening. Because the X-rays, they come across the universe for 10 billion years in some cases and get stopped by the Earth's atmosphere in the last second or so, you have to put your telescope above the atmosphere. So you have to put it in space. And so we've had this X-ray telescope in space for 25 years now. It's still working really well. Tragically, yesterday we heard that NASA has decided to shut it down. And so even though it's good, I think, for another 10 years, and we're getting incredible scientific discoveries every year from it, the budget cuts at NASA, they've decided that we're going to be the ones who get shut down. So we're all updating our resumes right now. But I think we've delivered an amazing science capability to the world, and there isn't anything planned to replace it. We don't have another X-ray observatory that has sharp vision on the books yet. So we'll lose this capability for a generation or more.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to process.
Yeah. Tell us about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how much would it cost to keep it operational these days? Like, could we crowdfund to save it?
Yeah, it costs us $60 million a year, which probably sounds like a lot of money, but compared to a lot of other, great observatory type missions, we're actually pretty lean. Compared to sort of, like the military budget and so on, it's nothing, right? But yeah, 60 million a year is the, and we might be able to do it for 50 million a year, but they're cutting us down to 40 million next year, 20 million a year after that, and then we're basically shutting down. So unless we can get that decision reversed, it'll be the end of a very prestigious career. for this fantastic observatory.
I mean, I know this is quite early since the news arrived just yesterday, but is there a petition or something that people could sign to say, hey, we actually we still want this?
I can't really talk about that kind of stuff because that we're not allowed to lobby as getting money from NASA. So all I can say is I'm happy to talk about the benefits that Chandra brings, and I do think that we can certainly justify the cost. We're not cheap, but we're not. As such things go, we're not ridiculously expensive. We're cheaper than Hubble. We're cheaper than James Webb. In terms of operating costs, and so hopefully, I'm hoping that the powers that be will come to see that it should be kept.
Yeah. I mean, this is in part why MoonDAO exists, is to try to support things that might not get the attention they deserve, I guess. So let's definitely, let's game plan and see if there's anything that MoonDAO can do to support this. Because that's really sad. And I'm shocked to learn this.
Yeah. Well, we were pretty shocked yesterday. We knew we were in for cuts, but there's a level of cut where you can go, okay, we're going to run a minimum mission, and we're going to have a less good service to the community, and fire half a staff or something like that, and then there's a level of cut where you go, yeah, no, we can't. This is a complicated machine, and we can't safely operate it, below a certain staffing level.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, yeah. Let's. Let us know how we can support, how we can help, and I'm
sure there will be stuff out there about this, and but I want to sort of come back to the positive. That I think I was there in 1999 at the press site actually because I was writing for Sky Telescope as well as being an astronomer on the project, and so I saw the Space Shuttle Columbia take off from Kennedy Space Center with Chandra aboard and rocket it into space. And then we had a 20-ton firework, the IUS, on the end of Chandra that boosted it to this high orbit around the Earth. It takes about 2 days to go around the Earth. It's out at about 140,000 kilometers. And it was kind of fun seeing. So our mission control center at that point was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just up the street from MIT and from Harvard, where the science center is. And so to hear the astronauts say, talking back and forth with our people and going like, Columbia, this is Cambridge. Do you copy? Instead of Houston was kind of a kick.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, that must have just been the highlight of your career to that point, I guess, to see something like that launch out. That's incredible.
Yeah, I'd been working on the project for 5 years before launch, and it was all like, you see your entire career, right, go up on a pillar of flame, and it was actually a very sporty launch. We one of the more dangerous shuttle launches, and so we were very happy that it got to space in one piece, and we Eileen Collins and her crew deployed it beautifully, and so we've been very grateful to NASA for the care they took in getting it to space, and it's been working fantastically ever since. It's still it's 25 years old, so it's all of us getting a little old, all of us starting to fall apart a bit. It's got thermal insulation that is not working so well anymore. It's got a layer of crud on the camera that means that it's some color, X-ray colors, it doesn't see quite as well anymore. But basically, it's doing great for 25 years, and spacecraft years are like dog years, right? So it's a very elderly spacecraft, and it's doing fantastically for its age.
Yeah, 25 years. That's really impressive. I'm surprised that it's held up so well. So I'm curious. You you not only have developed hardware, but also software for analyzing, doing the data analysis on the X-ray astronomy. I'm curious what sort of advancements or innovations you see in that area in the future. Given everything that we're seeing today with AI and data analysis methods, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically a scientific software guy. I don't actually do the hardware myself. And so, I think we've advanced the state of the art in astronomy data analysis for sure. And we have some of the most widely used software tools in astronomy. I think, what we're seeing, I'm not sure the extent to which AI is going to be really reliable for what we do, but machine learning techniques are very much coming to the fore in astronomy. We're using a lot of those now and one of the things is that as well, big data generally, right? That, it used to be that a terabyte of data was a lot of data. And now we're seeing observatories that are going to produce petabytes a day and just this vast amount of data that you absolutely have to fully automate the data analysis in order to make use of it. And so I think astronomers are really, at the forefront of being able to cope with these very large quantities of data and figure out how to reliably process them and be able to ask meaningful scientific questions of them. And so machine learning techniques are very much part of that. I did some early machine learning. I remember doing as an undergrad back in 1980 in Edinburgh in the UK, doing sort of training sets, star galaxy, to teach the computer which blobs on the photographic plate were stars and which were galaxies, and using then that as a training set for a machine learning, a primitive machine learning algorithm. So we've been pushing the algorithm space for a long time, and we've also, been really committed to the open source community and open source software, and so all of our data analysis code is free and open source.
That's awesome. MoonDAO, we really pride ourselves in making all of the code that we generate out into the open source. Where can we find that data analysis code? How do we? Is there a GitHub repo that you guys publish, or?
Yeah, and we're migrating it to GitHub this year. Actually, it hasn't been because we've been developing it internally rather than developing it community based. Right. So some of our stuff is on GitHub already, and some isn't. But the package, and which includes the source code, is available from our science site. So we have a website for the pretty pictures for the public, and that's chandra.harvard.edu. But then we have a website for professional astronomers that is cxc.harvard.edu, CXC for the Chandra X-ray Center, which is the team that operates the spacecraft and supports the community. And so on the CXC website, you can download our data analysis package, which is called CHOW, Chandra Interactive Analysis of Observations. So CHOW, which it may not be a surprise to you that a lot of our team actually are Italians. And so that package, which runs on both Mac and Linux, and is freely available and has the source code and scans of documentation. And so we've even had high school students use it successfully to analyze data. So the other thing about these NASA observatories, right, is that all of the data becomes public a year after it's taken. So you can just go to the archive and download the data.
That's awesome. I just bookmarked the site, cxc.harvard.edu. That's awesome. So you said that most of the team is Italian, and that's of no surprise. Why
Not
why is
not
that?
not most, but well, that's why it's called showers. As I was saying, shouldn't be surprising. But no, but we did have a significant subset of Italians because the guy who started X-ray astronomy in 1962 was a guy called Riccardo Giacconi, who was an Italian who'd come over to MIT and then launched rockets for the Air Force, and then started doing these science X-ray astronomy rockets. And he founded our team ultimately. And of course, he then hired a bunch of Italians to come over to the US and join the team. And so when I first joined the team in the 1980s, it was almost as common to see hear Italian spoken in the corridor as English. But now we're very international. I mean, there's one of the things I love about astronomy, by the way, is that we're such an international field. And so as I walk down the corridor of my colleagues, we have people from Russia, from Korea, from Italy, from Poland, from England, even some Americans. And so it's a really multicultural environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm looking him up now, Riccardo Giacconi. So so you've really done some in-depth writing on the history of spaceflight, and I'm curious, is there anything that really, like, I mean, obviously there must be many things that stand out. You've been writing this newsletter on the history of spaceflight since 1989. But is there something that really surprised you about the early history of spaceflight? Something that maybe not many people are aware of, that you found in your scouring of the literature? Because you're even
Right.
looking at declassified Russian.
That's right. And I mean, for
Yeah.
me, the fun part, is not the thing that will entertain everybody, but the really obscure trivia piece that I discover on this particular satellite. Right. That's the fun for me. But yeah, there are a lot of things that I think people don't know. I mean, the one thing is, the early space program. Right now, we can look back. I remember a day when, back in the 70s, when everything we could figure out about the Russians, was very limited because they weren't saying much about what they did. And they never admitted their failures, right? So now all of that's been declassified from the Russian side, and we know which rockets worked and which ones didn't, and so on. And so we can compare the Russian and American success records. And really, for the first 5 years of the space age, they were running about 50% each. Like, you had a 50-50 chance of getting into orbit, which I think would terrify people nowadays, right? And so we can find out a lot about what the missions were really doing. I think the bigger revelations have come on the U.S. side. With the declassification of the early spy satellites. And, a lot of those we kind of knew about. And again, people nowadays may not know about the Discoverer program, the early Air Force space program that was actually a cover for the CIA's Corona spy satellite, and how they they were trying to take photographs of the Soviet Union on film cameras, and then they would eject the film capsule and retro-rocket it back to Earth and catch the capsule on parachutes in midair by planes flying out of Pearl Harbor, and then courier the film back to Washington for analysis. And just an incredible James Bond kind of operation. And the first, 14 missions, right? It was only on the 14th mission that they got their first photographs back. It kept blowing up or crashing or not working in various different ways. And so, if you can imagine the stick additiveness of, trying again and again and again and not giving up. And that was 14 launches in 2 years, by the way. So a year and a half even. So they were really putting them up there at a rate and just going, okay, that broke, let's try this. And eventually they got it working. And it became very quickly a key aspect of U.S. national intelligence. So there was also the great story of the really first successful spy satellite was actually a listening satellite, a radar measuring satellite. And so they had this little sphere that had a solar physics experiment in from the Naval Research Lab. And then at night, unknown even to the people who are doing the solar physics experiment, they snuck in and installed the signals intelligence receiver in the other half of the satellite. And so it was like super spy stuff. And so they launched this thing. Oh yeah, it's a solar radiation measuring satellite, but it was actually measuring the frequencies of the Russian air defense radars. And so all of those stories have now come out. There's a lot that I could give that are really, a lot of them are really fun.
Is there anything that that still hasn't come out that you're kind of waiting to see the fully declassified info on?
I mean, pretty much everything from the 50s and 60s is out now, and so we're waiting for like the late 60s, early 70s stuff. There's a satellite called Canyon that was one of the first geostationary orbit satellites intercepting the radio signals from Russian missiles to figure out what was going on with them. And there was a satellite in the 70s called Kennan that was the first satellite to fly CCDs, the chips that are now in your cell phone camera. And so it was the predecessor of Hubble, if you like. And so we're still waiting for some of the details on that. But we know the broad outlines. It turns out that we had guessed a fair amount of what the military on both sides were up to in space. Now that we can look up the answers in the back, we did pretty well because it's really hard to hide things in space, right? If you have a several-ton satellite, particularly in low Earth orbit, you look up and you see it going over. Ooh, what's that? So there's only they try to be ever so secret about these things, but with only mixed success, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I guess on the topic of declassification, you've made some comments around the whole UAP UFO phenomena, and there's a lot coming out these days. Do you put any weight on it? I mean, I'm curious what your thoughts are, I guess, on that whole subject.
Yeah, I'm very much a skeptic. I mean, yes, there are things in the sky that aren't immediately obvious, but I get emails like this all the time, right? Oh, I saw something weird in the sky, right? And almost always it's an airplane contrail illuminated by the sun in some weird way, or it's a satellite deorbit that's going on that I can actually identify. And people get very excited by things that are actually quite normal, but they just haven't seen them before. And a lot of this UAP stuff, I mean, it's not really so much in my area because it's clearly not space in the sense of, things that like fighter pilots have seen on their instruments and stuff like that. But I'm, having followed it to a certain extent, I'm fully convinced that it's all, it's sensor problems, it's misinterpreting how far away something is. People get my experience with people describing what they see in rocket launches, where I know the trajectory of the rocket and I know what was actually going on. They can get they're convinced that it's coming and going in an absolutely different direction from the way it's actually going, right? Because if it's going very fast towards you, all you see is the sideways motion relative to you, and it's very, it's sort of optical illusion, very confusing. And so, reporting of these things tends to be, people are so confident about what they saw, and they're completely wrong about what they saw. And so and then there's the higher level thing. If you actually think these things are aliens, right? Well, no, because if you've got the technology to go between star systems, then your technology is a lot better than ours. And if you think about how good our technology is, if they wanted to be seen, it's going to be, like I've said in many occasions before, it's going to be like Independence Day, right? It's going to be 20-mile across starships hovering over New York, right? It's not going to be some weird thing that you kind of saw out of the corner of your eye and never quite, got a handle on. And someone put it very well about this sort of low information objects, that whenever you have enough data to really nail something down, it turns out to be something perfectly ordinary. All of the outstanding sort of mysterious, what is this, are things where you don't actually have enough information to really say anything. And so that's a clue, right? That whenever you have something where you do get enough information, it's not aliens. And so I'm pretty sure all the other things are not aliens either.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think at the very least, it's interesting to study this stuff, and it seems like it is being taken more and more seriously by some parts of the scientific community, even if it is approaching it from an angle of skepticism. But I
think that's fair. I mean, I think we may discover things we don't know about, atmospheric phenomena, natural stuff, right? That's worth finding out. We may find things about how your military plane sensors can generate garbage sometimes, which is really important to know, right? And so there are all kinds of things you might learn. I just am pretty skeptical that you'll learn anything about aliens.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it is interesting though. I don't know how up to date and you are on some of the very recent disclosures. There's a fellow called David Grush who's kind of gone out and said, "Hey, I was I'm part of this part of the government that's working on basically analyzing what the U.S. government has been working on when it comes to UAPs. What have they been investigating?" And then he's reported that the program has started all the way back to the 50s and 60s, and he's a relatively level-headed guy. He doesn't seem like a wacko or anything like that. So it's interesting to me, at the very least, that the U.S. government has been paying close attention to these types of phenomena and cataloging them for many years, and even says that there's certain materials that seem to be not created here on Earth.
That particular state claim has been debunked. I understand. I haven't followed it in detail, but I've seen that be ridiculed. I mean, it's I think part of the going back to the 50s and 60s one was the U.S. government was sort of encouraging this to some extent, in that a lot of what people were actually seeing in the 60s was classified U.S. Air Force stuff. And so when people started going, "Oh, these are aliens," part of the response in certain parts of the government was, "Oh, good, let's let them think they're aliens because we don't want them to know what they actually are."
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've I've got some family that worked at Northrop, and they were basically saying the same thing, that it's certain capabilities that the U.S. government has that they just they'd rather let people think are aliens.
And by the way, the same thing very much happened in the Soviet Union. The USSR actually sort of encouraged some of these UFO ideas, because a lot of the UFOs that people saw were actually rocket plumes from their secret orbital spy satellite launch site in northern Russia.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah,
so it's like, what's that? Oh, it's probably aliens. It's not a secret Russian launch site at all.
Yeah. No, I'm sure at least some of the phenomena is just exactly that. But yeah, I'm gonna keep an eye out on all of this stuff that's coming out, just out of curiosity. Maybe just a part of me wants to.
I'll say one other thing about the whole UFO thing. If there really were, scientists studying captured aliens in Area 51 or something like that, right? It's like, I mean, have you met scientists? They can't keep their mouths shut to save their lives. And you know, the same is even true of the military to a lesser extent. That there are many things that the government is actually good at. I'm not one of these people who thinks that government's a bad idea and that it can never do anything right. But keeping secrets, that is not something the government is good at. And something like this for decades, no, it would all be out by now. And so I think it's it's just not credible to think that secrets of that magnitude would remain secret.
But isn't that just a thing though? There have been people that have worked at those quote unquote secretive areas that have come out and talked about what they're working on, right? So doesn't that kind of defeat that? Then what about the Bob Lazars of the world that have come out and said, yes, we're working on this, and here's a bunch of details about it.
But all their details were like patent nonsense. So, I mean, yeah, it's also true, right, that there are crazy, just as there are crazy people everywhere, there are crazy people who work for the government. Yeah, I don't take it very seriously, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I and whether or not people believe him is that's up to them. It's an interesting story at the very least. It's fun to keep an eye out on. But anyways, I'm curious also. So you've been in the astrophysics world for a long time. What advice do you have to young people that are interested in someday becoming an astrophysicist? What should they be studying? What should they?
Yeah, well, maths and physics is that. I mean, I think the thing is you can pick up the astronomy along the way, but you really need the strongest math background that you can get, and you need training in physics. And the great thing about astronomy is it lets when you study physics in high school, right? It's all very separate little boxes. There's thermodynamics and there's electricity and stuff like that, and they all are a bit abstract. And in a star, they're all going on at once, and so you get to take out all the toys and use them at once and see how they interact, and that's fascinating. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess fundamentally, when we're looking up at the stars, we're trying to gain a deeper understanding of the universe and what's going on, maybe understand better why we're here. And I feel like to some level, we've approached that question at many different angles. There's the more rationalist, secular version of things.
Mm-hmm.
There's maybe people that are coming at it from a more religious, spiritual dimension. And I'm curious, as someone that's been studying these questions for a long time, has there ever been something that's kind of popped out at you where you go, that's curious, and made you think, what if there is a creator, something beyond maybe just physical matter that something that's
it's really been the opposite intent for me, honestly. It's been the deeper I get into science, the deeper I get into all different kinds of science, the more it becomes clear that you have this amazing hanging together of the story of how simple laws take a very simple early Big Bang universe, create through this curdling of the lumps under gravity this complicated structure, and the sort of creation of complicated things from simple things by the operation of a few simple laws of physics. It all hangs together. Every little plank sort of supports every other little plank. and there's no sign, right, of someone poking at the levers and trying to trying to make things happen differently. And so the 50 years of studying astrophysics and physics and science generally have just made me a really solid atheist. And I have to say that's not true for everybody, right? There are plenty of religious astronomers, but for me, that's the takeaway that I've gotten from understanding how the universe works, from the Big Bang to the formation of the Earth, to the evolution of life, to the evolution of intelligence, and so forth. It all hangs together. Science makes sense. It's successful. It predicts things, and you really don't need anyone tweaking, messing with it.
Yeah, well, I guess there might be certain different models for how people conceptualize the idea of a god or something like that. It seems like you're talking maybe about the god in the interventionist sense, in that he can just declare, this is going to happen there.
Well, that's maybe a caricature, right? But it's the other extreme, right, is a kind of underlying principle that is very hard to semantically distinguish from nature. Right.
Yes, exactly.
And so I think then there are people who use the language of religion but don't, they're not actually, when you look at it, they're not actually asserting anything that isn't just nature. And so I don't find that very useful personally, but people can understand the universe how they want. So I'm not going to tell anyone how to believe. I'm just saying what my take is on the universe from my seeing how it, learning how it works and going, yeah, okay, I really like this way of looking at it where it just happens, and it seems the more we understand, the more it makes sense that it just happens.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, but I suppose that worldview doesn't necessarily, it is not mutually exclusive with the idea that there could have been some construction of physical laws and constants that give rise to the phenomena that we see. And do you ever think about what could have happened before the Big Bang to
sure, yeah. I mean, but it's very hard, right, to pin down. And I guess the thing is this: when you start with, if you think about where we were a few thousand years ago, with like, there are gods, Thor is throwing the lightning bolts, and that's why we've got a storm, and everything that happened we didn't understand, and was the gods, right? And over time, more and more and more of the world has been explained and understood. And now, you're squeezing and squeezing and squeezing the not understood part into this tiny, okay, we understand everything except, the first 10 to the minus 43 seconds of the universe. So, yeah, sure, you can, we can't rule out, things there, but the trend has been pretty compelling. And so I'm not going to rule out that we will ultimately understand all the way back to, why are the physical laws what they are. Maybe, for example, they're the only possible set of physical laws that you end up with a self-consistent universe.
Yeah, like the I guess the anthropic principle, sort of like
right, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think it's I'm just going on like we've got 99% of the story. The last 1%, I'm betting will go like the previous 99%.
Yeah, I forget the joke. It's like, give me one miracle, and then I'll explain to you the rest of the universe. And right now, our one miracle is that Big Bang. Before that, we can't really reason about the.
There are models. There are people like J. Richard Gott and so on who have models of how you can create space-time from background space-times and basically out of its own rear end, but it's hard to test them at this point, right? So we can reason about it, but we're lacking right now. At least we're lacking ways to get at any evidence. But there are things that we can measure now that we never thought we'd be able to measure. So maybe that will change.
Yeah. Is there any particular theory that that you feel maybe based on an intuition rather than an ability to observe? For example, do you put any weight on the sort of multiverse theory, like that maybe there are many different kinds of universes with different kinds of cosmological constants, and or yeah, I don't know.
That's possible. Yeah. It feels a bit wasteful, right? But that's not necessarily a valid argument against it. So, So I'm sort of still open on the multiverse question. It's possible. It's one way to go at it. It's also possible that there's sort of like a virtual multiverse where there might have been such things, but then they involve self-contradiction, and so they don't come into actual existence, something like that. So I don't know. That I think is a challenge for another generation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it gets to a level of abstraction that our brains can't really. I feel at least mine can't reason about. Even beyond a fourth dimension or something like that. What's going on in like a geometric sense.
That just requires training and practice, I think.
Yeah. I'm curious. Do you put weight on because, for example, string theory is something that has been evolved a lot in terms of mathematical models, but it's very difficult to actually get any concrete observations about what's going on at that scale. Do you put any weight
my
on
gut
that?
right now is that string theory isn't right, just because they've made so little progress in the last 20 years, as far as I can see. But I could be wrong about that too. I don't work on these very fundamental theories, and so I'm not professionally competent to really comment on them. And so I'm really just going on my gut here that I think we're missing something, and maybe something like string theory is part of the answer, but there's something that's not quite gelling right now.
Yeah, there are, I guess, or maybe on an intuitive sense, people have said, as above, so below. Do you believe in that at all? Do you think that there's some relation between the macro scales and the micro scales?
No, I don't. I think that's an illusion. I mean, there are some, very coarse level analogies, but when you really get into the nitty gritty, it's not the same. And in particular, quantum mechanics is very different, right? Once you get started down onto the quantum scale, everything is really different from how things operate on the macro scale. And so I think one has to be very suspicious of those analogies. They can be illustrative, but I don't think they have fundamental truth.
Interesting. Yeah. So I guess bringing it back to the present day moment, I'm curious what you think about some of the new innovations in spaceflight. Like Starship and the ability to carry a lot bigger payloads into space, and what implications this might have for the type of telescopes that we can bring up, and I'm curious about your excitement about these future telescopes.
I do think if Starship works, it is a game changer. The challenge for space astronomy is that these payloads are always going to be very expensive. It's not like an Earth observing satellite. If you're going to build a big astronomy telescope, it's going to be very expensive, but it's not going to be as expensive as it was, because you don't, for example, if you build something, comparable to the James Webb, you won't have to build this horrible, complicated unfolding structure because you can just build it deployed and fit it inside the huge cargo bay. And you don't have to shave every gram because you don't care about the weight anymore. And so there are a lot of practices in satellite building, not just astronomy satellites, but all satellites, where people have been, so driven, particularly by the mass, but also by the volume. And once you relax those constraints, you can actually design things much more simply with much more simple materials, and really bring down the costs. And so I think that will be very fruitful for everybody involved in space.
Yeah.
But there are some things, but there are some things which are still going to be hard and expensive. So it gets you a lot. It doesn't get you a free pass for everything.
Yeah. So we're a little bit past the hour here. So I want to invite anyone from the audience that wants to ask a question to Jonathan directly, if they'd like to request and jump up here. Jonathan, let us know if you have any cutoff here. But yeah,
I probably have a cutoff at past.
Okay, great. So yeah, if anyone has a question and they'd like to jump up on stage, feel free to request the microphone. It's at the bottom left-hand side. If you click that, it'll pop a notification up here, and we can get you up on stage. And so I guess while we're waiting for people to jump on here, I'll ask you one more question here. Is there anything that in particular that you felt constrained on when developing the telescopes that you've helped bring to life, just because of that mass and volume? Is there something that you wish that you could have put on there that you were kind of constricted?
I think, I wasn't, the Chandra was already pretty designed by the time that I got on board, so I haven't been so constrained with that. I think the main thing, if we were doing Chandra again, right, we actually made a design called Lynx for a better Chandra. And some of it is just advances in our understanding of how to build X-ray mirrors, and isn't so much to do with the other advances in space technology. But one thing I think would be very different is that with Chandra, we have a very limited bandwidth of communications to Earth, right? We only have about 32 kilobits a second. So that's like crappy oldie style modem sort of data link. And so I think we would be able to bring much more data back to Earth, and get much more throughput in that sense. So that would be a big advantage. I think for other telescopes, one thing that we've seen an evolution of is where we put them, right? So the Hubble, of course, was put in low Earth orbit so it could be serviced by the shuttle. That's not where you want to put telescopes, because at first you have the day-night thermal cycling as you orbit every 90 minutes. And now as well, you also have the screen of Starlink satellites that you're looking out through that are going to, get in the way of your observations. So more and more people are stationing their telescopes at the Earth-Sun Lagrange point, L2, and that has a lot of advantages. And so I think we're going to see more and more of our space telescopes being stationed at L2. And so then now, until recently, that meant you had to, it was hard to get a big thing out to L2 because you need a bigger rocket, right? And so I think, the relaxation of that constraint means we can have big telescopes at L2 relatively cheaply, and hopefully we can have robotic vehicles that can go out to L2 and service them and do things like change out the cameras and things like that. And so I think that'll be very valuable in the long run.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we've got Mitchie here on stage. Mitchie, if you'd like to ask your question. And so people have requested, we'll get you up here one by one. So yeah, don't worry, we'll get you up here. Go ahead, Mitchie.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. It's been a really interesting talk. I have a bit of an open-ended question. I read an article recently which alerted me to this idea that in astronomy, a lot of the language that's used is very violent and not necessarily even accurate. Like we talk about collisions when really they're more like intertwinings. They don't happen very quickly like a collision. That's, a very, very slow event. And we use terms like cannibalism, harassment, starvation, strangulation, suffocation. I'm just kind of wanted to get your take on like why you think that might be the case, and just in general, what your take is on that.
I think we use these dramatic terms because the cosmos is dramatic. So I don't entirely agree with these criticisms. For example, the collisions, the fact that they may take 1 million years, like the colliding galaxies I was talking about when they merge, doesn't mean it's not a collision, right? It's supersonic. It creates shock waves. It destroys structure in these galaxies. It creates new structure, and so I think it's actually a fair name. Maybe it's just a generational thing, but I feel that's an oversensitivity. Certainly open to discussing, whether we should rename certain things, but in general, the universe is majestic and beautiful, but it is also violent and dramatic.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I like your answer. I kind of also had the same feeling that at first I was like, their argument is that a collision creates new structure, and that most collisions in our day-to-day lives don't do that.
But they do. They're just that. I mean, they're just the new structures are not ones we want.
Exactly. Right? No, I also agree that like collision just sounds also way more badass, and space is badass, so it kind of fits.
Yeah, there is that, I think we talk about mergers, right, which is not a violent thing. And so we do make the distinctions sometimes. Anyone who thinks that a supernova isn't violent, I invite them to go stand next to one.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll take my leave.
Thanks, Mitchie. All right, LK Ultra. Nice to see you here, Leo. How's it going?
Hello. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Hey, Pablo. Hey, Jonathan. My question is having to do with just kind of mental puzzles. Do you have any mental puzzles that you like to do on your free time, Jonathan? Like Schrodinger's cat comes to